Ben was saying he like it's not like he tried to get us to do different stuff. He was like, well, what are you trying to have happen, right? And then he was like, well, this is how maybe I'd change things a little to get that to happen. So it was cool, man. I would highly recommend it. But yeah, I'll have to call you and catch up about it more later. But like I said, we just kind of had a lull in the conversation, so I was like, maybe we should let Derek have a little cameo on this episode here.
Nice.
All right, man. Everything going good for y'all?
Just super busy. But yeah.
Yeah, grass growing.
Grass is growing, and hopefully we get some rain and
Yeah,
things are happening. So
good. Well, hey, that reminds me. I've got a Kaylee sent it to me a while back. I've got a TikTok I got to send to you, and it's about those. It's about this guy in Spain who was breeding all these horses for all these years, and then they put a bunch of windmills on the ranch next to him, and then all his colts were like being born with, or they weren't being born, but they were developing all these tendon problems, and they figured out it was the windmills doing it. So I was like, man, that's some Derek Chapelier like tinfoil hat stuff right there, but it's confirmed. Yeah.
I'll have to check that out. Because I think I've told you about that, but me and Zoe were just talking about that the other day. We're kind of wondering if that was going to be an issue,
like having
in the future, of course.
Yeah, like having the colts too close to windmills.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. They don't. They seem to do a little more harm than good from what I've seen. But anyway,
Yeah.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, hey, we're gonna keep recording, but I'll call and catch up with you later, man, and we'll visit some more on the whole deal.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll do.
All right, take care, bud. See ya.
Got old.
Yeah,
Derek.
we got to work out because like I know on Zoom you can like join a Zoom call with your phone. Like
Yeah.
Riverside needs that where we can have like listeners call in.
Yeah, where you can take a call. I know, like with the deal I have here, if somebody called my phone, it patches through with Bluetooth into the sound system, and they can.
Well, maybe I just need to get that.
Yeah, we need to get you one of those. That Sam Rode Procaster thing.
What do they run? Do you remember?
I think it was like $400 or $500.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't
So it's
terrible.
an investment.
It's kind of
Yeah,
but
not
it's worth
bad.
it, though, for the sound. Because
Yeah.
remember the in-person podcasts we've done, they sound perfect. That thing will take out sounds and kind of edits everything.
Yeah.
Hey, so what were you guys talking about windmills, though? Are you talking about like RFID signals, or like what's affecting the horses?
The vibrations in the ground that they cause.
Oh, really?
Have you not? So I didn't know about this
Not-
until
You think
like,
about it.
because obviously I live, you're kind of the same way right now. You live in a place where there's not a lot of windmills, right? As opposed to like Oklahoma, or I know there's parts of like Southern California that have a bunch, and there's a bunch in Texas. But, so yeah, I was just asking Derek and some of the local ranch guys out there. And there's some things like, oh, they're an eyesore or this or that. But I know the ones, this is what I've heard about the ones in the part of Oklahoma I was in. One, supposedly the power doesn't even go anywhere in Oklahoma. It's all fed back to the grid, back to St. Louis. So that's kind of a tough draw, like sitting there having a bunch of windmills on your landscape while the power is getting shipped out of state, right? But they were saying that, they run those windmills and then the cattle are grazing underneath them. And I mean, these things are massive, like skyscraper type heights, right? And so when they rotate, that vibration comes down into the shaft and like vibrates the ground. And they were saying that some of those ranchers felt like it was affecting the hooves of their cattle and how they were growing, like the cattle grazing underneath them. And that was all kind of like, across the fence, like, oh, the neighbor said this or whatever. And then again, none of this is fact. This is all just what I've heard. But then Kaylee was sending me this TikTok after we were out there. And there's this Spanish rancher somewhere in Spain. where they had windmills on his ranch, and he'd been like raising, those bullfighting horses, like those Lusitano horses, for 20 years or something. And then all of a sudden they put windmills there, and he was like, his colts were being born fine, but pretty quickly they were developing like these tendon problems in like their lower legs. And they linked it back to the windmills, and like grazing underneath the windmills with all the ground vibration, it does something to like how their leg tendons were developing. And I guess they were able to get them fixed or something, but then he, had to sue the windmill company for what the vet bills cost. And, it's just, there's a lot of speculation about those windmill deals.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Before going out there, I didn't really have opinions on windmills. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. Like, I think everyone on paper is probably pro green energy, but then if they have all these negative effects, because I've heard they affect the weather and the precipitation on the ranches they're on, right? Because it like changes the air pattern, so it changes like who's getting rain and stuff. And I could see where maybe that's possible, but I could also see where it'd be easy to like be in a drought and then just blame the windmills that went up next door, instead of having to know that that's ranching, and that's sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't, sort of thing.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm definitely not an authority on it. I was Googling stuff while you were talking, though, and it sounds like, you've got all the angles. You had the folks talking about, you were talking about the vibrations and then birds getting killed and all that. But one thing I've seen is those videos of bulldozers covering the windmill wings that are used up, the fiberglass wings. Have you seen that? Or when they're done with them, they bury them and then replace the tines or whatever you call that, like the turbine on the windmill, and they just bury the old ones. I don't know. I think it's kind of a stupid form of electricity, honestly, because if you follow the money, and there's a lot of, it's just not very smart, right? Compared to hydroelectric or nuclear power. But again, like, I'm not an expert, but just looking at it, it doesn't seem that smart. It's like a lot of effort to put up one windmill.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even last that long. But it makes sense. Like, it doesn't make sense in terms of making affordable electricity in a large quantity. It does make sense in terms of some company figuring out how to sell their shit and get people to buy it and put up a bunch of windmills. Like, somebody's making a crap load of money off of that. But I don't think it's the consumer buying electricity, and I don't think it's the rancher, besides the fact that he gets a decent subsidy to have it on his land. And then the government, I mean, we all know they spend money irresponsibly anyway, so I don't think they really care.
Yeah.
I don't think they're trying to make money from the windmill. They're making money somehow. So long story short, I don't know. I'm not an authority, but it does seem fishy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing I'd heard too is it costs millions of dollars to dismantle those things. I mean, I didn't realize how big they can get, but like a 20-story tall building at least. I mean, they're massive. So it was just, it was crazy to me that, one day you are going to have to dismantle those. Or what if we do find out they have this awful adverse side effect and we need to take them down? Like, who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
So, but it's tough because it's like, on paper, who isn't pro renewable energy, right? But then it gets so complex so quickly that unless it's really flushed out, and to be fair, it's one of those things, I guess you got to try stuff because you're never going to perceive every con of something until you do it, right?
Yeah. Now, this is interesting. So I looked up, how long does it take a windmill to pay for itself? And from what I'm reading here, it's anywhere from 6 months to a year. And in 1 month, an average wind turbine produces over 843,000 kilowatts, enough to power 940 average U.S. homes. And this is multiple different sources that I'm citing from. I mean, you can just go down, and it all kind of runs parallel that they do pay for themselves and they do generate a lot of electricity. So maybe they're not as evil as you think. Like, that's the other thing, man, is like, yeah, I'm all for like putting on the tinfoil hat and being like, why are they putting up all these wind turbines and they're killing our cows? But at the same time, like, again, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about wind turbines. Like, maybe they really are out there just pumping electricity and doing a great job, and everybody's just pissed at the wind turbine company. So I'm really not going to take sides. I think they look ugly. There's probably a very good chance that they are having an ill or adverse effects on young horses or cattle from vibrations. But I guarantee you they do make some power. I mean, windmills, it's not a brand new idea. Maybe it's not a perfect form of electricity, but again, it's like hard to take sides. So to me, that's kind of a great segue, right? So we're talking about something we don't know jack about, but we were just talking with Derek about our couple of days there. It's really easy to want to find like negative things about people or things or differences. And like, you know me, like I'm the first guy to start drawing lines in the sand. But what you said to Derek is really true. Like, you know, Buck and Joe have more in common than they have not in common. And it's like maybe like wind turbine people that are professionals could have the same conversation, and they could talk about like the pros and cons of windmills. But we can certainly talk about the pros and cons of things we know more about. And like one thing would be like guys who are very skilled at what they do, like specifically in horsemanship, and really care about their students and care about them doing better. Even if they have slightly different opinions on how to get things done, and those opinions are shaped, you know, much in part to their upbringing, their life experience, their mentors, their way they think and their intellect processes what they're seeing. At the end of the day, though, they have a lot more in common than they have not in common. And 9 times out of 10, like the two professionals themselves that have a following don't really have a problem with each other. It's their followers who end up, you know, taking up swords and going to war. So I don't really know where I'm going with that, besides the fact that I don't know anything about windmills, but sounds like a fascinating subject. But in terms of the last couple of days that we spent together up there riding with Joe, I enjoyed that. Like I said, I think there's something to be said for, you know, if you go try to, heck, even the Bible talks about that. If you try to drink from more than one cup, like you can't serve two masters at the same time. And to me, that's like when you're really young in your growth, when it comes to learning something new, yeah, you got to be careful about just like stretching yourself thin and trying to learn from a bunch of different people, because you'll just come away from it being confused. But once you start to build a bit of a foundation in yourself, then you can certainly learn something from everybody. And I know that, like, people say that a lot, like you can learn something from everybody. And I don't know.
And they follow that up with, most of the time you can learn what not to do. Right?
Yeah, they do. And like, that's true. That's also kind of a negative way to look at life. Whereas, I don't know, just back to our couple days there, yesterday and the day before, the thing that stood out to me was that Joe has spent his life like really caring for horses. Like, it struck me that Joe probably loves horses and cares about them like far more than I do, probably more than I ever could. And it didn't make me feel bad or make me want to change my feelings. I mean, I'm in the horse business for the reason that I'm in it, right? Horses grabbed my attention in a certain way that's particular to my character, and that's great. I love that. I'm going to lean into that. But being around Joe, I can tell that horses grabbed his attention in a little different way. They affect him a little bit differently. And I can get value from that. You know, the way he thinks about working with a horse, like the most important thing to him is different than the most important thing to me. And it doesn't mean the most important thing to me about working with a horse is bad, but it does mean that the most important part of working with a horse to him can help me quite a bit. And so that really struck me the most, is that when he saw a problem, the first thing he thought about was different than the first thing I think about. And and I didn't feel like he made my goals. I didn't feel like he diminished my goals or tried to make me do something else, but I did feel like he would just look at what you're doing and be real honest about how he felt about it, and make you think. So I really appreciated that, and it helped flesh out the image in my head of, you know, for instance, something like straightness in the horses. It helped just put a little more color in there and think about it. It's like if you were, you know, what's a really good example of that is, probably not everybody can relate with this, but lately when you go to get your teeth worked on, they don't use molds anymore. They don't put a mold in your mouth and like squish your teeth down on it. They have it's almost like a little LiDAR gun that they drag through your mouth, and they'll go through your mouth and they can see it on the screen. And as they go through your teeth, it puts a picture of what your mouth looks like on that screen. And then if they miss a few spots, they can go back and they can shine it down in there, and then it fills in those areas. And they have like a perfectly mapped out landscape of your mouth. And then they can make they can make a retainer from that, and it's perfect. So I feel like it's similar to the whole horse deal, right? Like, horses are an amazing creature. There's a way they operate. There's a way they think. There's a way that, like, if you want them to do something, you have to fit that in their mind to get them to do it. And so like there is a whole program there. Like, there's the horse program in nature, and it's a thing. It's like a very unique, it's like a natural computer system. You know, you have the mind of the horse and the body of the horse and that species. And so as a human, like, we think very differently. So when you approach them and you want to work with a horse, you start to learn how the horse thinks. And, you know, you could spend years and then you still only know like this side, or you know the physical side, or you know maybe you know all the nasty horses, or you know all the good horses. And so the more horses you work with, the more facets of the horse behavior and intellect and body you learn, you know. And then you work with a farrier, you learn about the feet, you learn about the anatomy. So it's like that image of, it's like the way that LiDAR thing goes through your mouth. You know, you're learning the landscape and every little facet about it. So being there with Joe, it was like, maybe there's some areas where you think you have an understanding, and then he says something and it like shades in a little area and just defines it a little bit more. You're like, oh yeah, that's really how that works. And I just found that very helpful. It's like, it just gave a little more definition to something that I've been accumulating over the time that I've been working with horses.
Yeah. I know for me personally, I tend to be very goal oriented in what I want to have happen with horses, right? So I want him to be good about a saddle, or I want him to turn around, or I want him to stop nice. And so I really focus on that thing happening, almost to the point where you can like prevent those things from happening, because it seems like Joe really encourages people to think, okay, how can you get the horse to make that one happen? Which is different than getting the horse to, like, making the horse do it, right? And I don't think that's a foreign concept at all, right? Like, we've heard that a bunch, like it needs to be their idea, yada yada. So it's 100% true, but it's different, right? When you have someone like Joe sitting right there watching you going to apply this concept, and they're like, whoa, so why are you doing that? How is what you're doing right now going to get that horse to want to do, whatever it is you want them to do? And I think you made a good comparison. Like, at least that clinic was kind of almost like a Bible study format, in that there was some discussion. Joe was leading the clinic, but he kind of put it in a way where it was a discussion, and you either had to justify what you were doing, or he kind of set it up for you to search how to get whatever you were getting done or trying to get done. You had to search to get that done in a way where the horse wanted to do it. And I think, honestly, like, I left leaving kind of how I leave after a lot of clinics, where you just get to be around people that are trying to do the same things, and you get to exchange these ideas. And it, like, kind of like, I woke up this morning feeling invigorated about it, because it's, if you're a Christian, it's like kind of the same thing as like going to church. So you can say, yeah, I'm trying to do all these things, X, Y, Z, da, da, da. But at some point you have to go and kind of get recalibrated and be around people that are also trying to do that, and be like, oh, okay, this is kind of making me be introspective about what I'm doing. And what we do, riding horses for the public, how it's so easy to get into a rhythm, especially because, I don't know, maybe 85% of horses, you can kind of get into a pattern and just like have a horse program, and it works. And I wouldn't say the horses, I wouldn't say they're unhappy, but if you stop and think about it, you can end up doing a lot less to get the same result, or sometimes even a better result, because the horse is like going, kind of searching for that result more, almost, because you did so little and you let them find it instead of just showing them. So
yeah. I mean, in general, it's a better way to live your life, because oftentimes I like to play devil's advocate with myself. So when I hear somebody talk about really slowing down and letting the horse think and get the horse to want to do it, like, I want that too, but right away I'll think, well, does it really matter that much? Like, it is just a horse, right? Like, yeah. I do think that sometimes. I'll think, like, you're right, but like, people are kind of important too, and like, do we really need to like navel gaze for like 6 hours about how we're going to get a horse to do something? But if you, so that's one way to look at it. Now, if you look at it the opposite way, it's like, well, why wouldn't you? Like, do you really want to fight with horses for the rest of your life? You and I talked about that. It's like being a warrior in the way that you do your horsemanship, where you set out to work with your horse and you have something you want to get done. Like you just said, you'll have like these goals, but when the horse is resistant and you see problems, rather than stopping and thinking right away, you're like, there's a problem. Like, before I get to my goal, that's my new goal. I've got to get that out of him. And it becomes very like witch hunter-esque, where you see a problem and you're like, I'm going to get that out of you. You become like the exorcist. And, and like, I love doing that, 'cause I like having a goal, right?
Yeah.
Like, I like having,
it comes from a good place, really.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, do you really want to live your life like that? And that's where I felt like being around Joe, it didn't take anything away from anything I've learned. And because, you know, I have mentors that have really helped me. And you know, I consider them my active mentors that learned a lot of things in terms of like exercises, and really it shaped the way that I want my horses to move. But I felt like Joe was saying, okay, hey, that's great. Like, I think what you're doing is great. Have you thought about this though? Like, have you thought about incorporating a little bit more of the your horse's mind in this deal? And I found that very beneficial. Like you were saying, you know, taking the goal and maybe changing the means to an end rather
Yeah.
than just being a warrior about it.
You know what summed it up for me? And I'm a sucker. I love all these guys we talked to that got to be around Ray and Tom. I love it when they quote those guys because I don't know, just have kind of grown up since being around this with such an admiration, especially since you can kind of look at those guys at our age because they're just kind of before our time, but you get to hear all these cool, grandiose stories about them and stuff. But what really summed up a lot of it for me was when Joe said that Ray often said, I want my horse to do my thing his way. Right. And so it's like, yeah, this is my goal. This is what I want my horse to be able to do. And this is how I want my horse to operate. But I've got to give him the dignity of sorting out how to do that. Right.
Yeah.
I can't impose my thing on him. And if you think about it, you know, I know you're in charge of guys. I've got some folks that work for me, and then work here for my dad that I've got to run some deals sometimes. Like, don't you feel like people operate way better when you just give them like a goal and maybe a few parameters instead of an itemized list of do this and then this and then this and then this and then this? Because when you give them the itemized list, it might get done, but I feel like don't approach it as enthusiastically, right? Because they don't have ownership of what they're doing. And that does seem to motivate people in my experience. I know it motivates me when I've worked for other people, is when they give me ownership of something. And then two, what if you have someone who, if you just give them the goal, it's like, yeah, they might kind of snake trail their way to the end goal. But what if in the midst of snake trailing, like they come across something cool that you like never could have thought of on your own, you know? And so there might be that horse where you're asking him to do something and you're trying to get to this end goal, but maybe on the way to that end goal, you found something you're like, man, I never knew horses had that to offer because I never kind of allowed the horse to find it on its own. So that quote right there is, I want the horse to do my thing his way. That to me is really deep.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of something Jayton said one time. Jayton Lord, he would have these interns come in, and he said he liked giving his interns a job and keeping the parameters pretty broad, and then he would watch them. And he said most of the time they'd screw up or fail, but sometimes he would learn a new way to do something because they would complete the task in a way that he would have never thought of doing it. And that takes some humility too, as the leader, to give out that task and not only give them the leeway to do it their way, but when they do it better than you would have, learn from it. And I feel like I have to do the same thing with horses, because I like to think I know how they ought to do it. Like, I'm not a horse. So that's like the last thing that I should be, trying to tell them how to do what they're going to do. and at the end of the day, we want them to operate like they do in the wild anyway. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So back to what you were saying though a minute ago about, you like that analogy about how being there with Joe was kind of like being at a Bible study or something. I like that too, because
You like your
I think it's
analogy?
great to go to. Was I the one that talked
You,
about that?
yeah, you're the one who said that. So that
Oh,
makes sense
okay.
that you like that analogy.
Hey, there we go. But I think it's really important to study something, right? And like study it and learn the fundamentals. But then, just like we talked about with Nick Dowers when he was on here, how his goal for the Cowboy Week thing is that everyone got together and there was no like teaching going on necessarily, but it was a gathering where you could bring up an idea and you could talk about it and see what everyone thought and maybe learn something from it. And now, granted, Joe's thing was a class, but I remember when we met at the beginning, he said he called it a clinic and he goes, gathering really. And he kind of like changed the title. But I thought that was a cool move because that environment's really important, I think, for the growth of somebody. And I'm not saying like if somebody doesn't know a whole lot about horsemanship, and that's like myself included. I mean, if I had gone to like a horsemanship gathering, like in the beginning stages of getting into this, I'd be really confused. In fact, I would feel like I was really bad at horsemanship. And I think I see that in people sometimes where they do hop around a lot between different instructors, and you ride with this guy and you're listening and you're trying to devote yourself to what he's saying, and you admire his riding ability and all that stuff. So you're there riding with him, you're listening, trying to learn what he's teaching. And then a month later you go to someone else's clinic and like everything they say is being interpreted through their experience in their life and the way they look at the horse. So it sounds quite a bit different. So then this individual who's trying to learn, who doesn't have a ton of experience under their belt, is now super confused and feeling like they're terrible at riding because everything this new person's saying sounds different from the last person. And they're struggling to try to, do what they're saying because they respect this other teacher. And then, a month later they go to somebody else and then it happens all over again. There's new terminology. There's like slightly different exercises, and they're really trying to give themselves to the teacher. And at each one of those clinics, they kind of felt like an idiot, and they felt like they didn't know what they were doing, and they felt like everything they practiced from the last guy was wrong, or they forget that they learned it from the last guy. It's just stuff they've been working on for a month, and then they go to a new clinic, and they're learning stuff that sounds different, and they're like, "Oh man, yeah, no wonder things aren't working. I wasn't doing what you're saying." And maybe without even thinking about it, they were doing what the last guy was saying. When really, they're just not that skilled. They haven't been doing it very long, for one. So they're not supposed to be that good at it yet. And then for two, they don't have a deep enough understanding or foundation that, yeah, the two people are saying something quite similar, but it's very different terminology. And it's just confusing the hell out of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot like we were talking about how it's kind of like let's take an example like financial advisors, right? You've got Dave Ramsey, pretty notable guy, and you've got someone like Robert Kiyosaki. Now, if you are, all right, let's make we'll make like a little avatar. Let's say we've got like a 35-year-old guy who's worked for Waste Management, and he makes $55,000 a year, and he's got a little house that he bought, and he's got like a truck that he puts a lot of money into, kind of a cool looking truck, and he goes to the bar on the weekends and has a girlfriend, and that's like his life, and he works all week. And then at 35, like one day he's in quite a bit of debt, and he kind of wakes up and he's like, "Oh shit, I've really got to get my act together. Like I want to do a little better in life. I want to make more." So then he starts learning there's people out there that teach him stuff. Well, that first like 6 months, if he listens to a bunch of Dave Ramsey, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm fired up. I'm going to do that." And then he like sees a reel on his phone from Robert Kiyosaki, and he's like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. And then he listens to that for 6 months. Like at the end of that year, he might still be in the same place he was at the beginning of that year, because he spent 6 months listening to one guy and then spent 6 months listening to the next guy thinking, oh man, that other guy was wrong. This guy's way better. And now he still doesn't know anything because he never had any financial education in the first place. He never had just the basics. So all he had was like the excitement and the hype and the examples, and he had one of them kind of saying like the exact opposite from the other one, and even maybe poking at the other one just a little bit. So all he did is he joined one camp and then joined another camp, but didn't really learn anything. And whereas if he, just learned some basics and had a fundamental understanding of like what happens when you make money and what happens when you spend money, and a few simple principles on how to live frugally, and then how to think for the future and how to invest. Well, now he would hear someone like Robert Kiyosaki say something, and he'd be like, yeah, that's great. And that probably doesn't fit me, that part there, but that sounds good. And then he could hear Dave Ramsey and go, yeah, that sounds pretty good. That's good discipline. And maybe that doesn't fit me too well. But he would be able to pick that out just fine. And he wouldn't get all hyped up. He wouldn't join one camp or the other, but he would just take something they said and go, yeah, that actually applies to what I've learned. And the difference is he's got a basis of understanding that didn't have to do with like the hype and the vision. It was just basic fundamental understanding of like how life works, how people think, and like where money goes when you have it. And to me, that was like a good example. Like that's just like horsemanship. If all you have is a horse and desire, and you're, especially if you're someone who can be excited easily, then yeah, you could go to any clinician in the world. You'll get super excited. And then you can go to the next guy and you'll get super excited. And all you'll do is get confused and confused and confused. And so, but if you have a horse and you learn some basics and some fundamentals and you practice and you ride and you get to where you kind of understand like just the actual facts of how a horse thinks, well, then you go to different people and everything they say starts to fill in and flesh out the understanding that you already have begun to gain. I know that's like super wordy, but that's, I just think that you see that reoccur in almost every walk of life. And the fact that, I don't know, I think being aware of that's really important. It's really helped me because I like joining camps. I like being a part of a group. But then when you realize that that is really common in every walk of life and in every discipline there is, then you can still join a camp. What you're doing is you're joining kind of like the brotherhood of everybody. And it's kind of like the good of everybody. Instead of just having your little camp, you're like joining a little bit bigger camp where you're like, hey, we're all in this together. And like, I care about what everyone's doing. And I can still keep my identity. I still have my goals. And just because someone else is saying something different than me doesn't need to threaten what I'm doing. And most of the time, if they're good at what they do, even if it's different than what I do, I can take just a little bit from what they're saying. Even if all it is like, I remember we talked after the NFR, right? Like we didn't learn how to team rope from the NFR, but I think we both took home like a burning desire to work hard, which at the end of the day, that's worth a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the way I would articulate it and kind of what you're saying as well, the experience is what grounds you, right? If you have the experience and you've actually turned your hand, in our case, something that's very physical, you turn your hand at actually trying to work with horses and start colts and make them better and all this stuff, you have an understanding of, I know things will work, right? And of course, there's always in horsemanship you'll get the next horse and you've got to be willing to abandon, well, this worked on the last one, but it doesn't work here, right? You need to be able to adapt and fit the situation. But you still have a general basis of experience to draw from. And like you said, if you have no experience, you just have a horse and desire, then if you jump around, you'll hear these things and you won't really be able to interpret them correctly, I think. Because, I mean, think back to the first time you ever went to like a horsemanship clinic to learn and how you thought about what you were hearing, right? And then 3 years later, you hear the same thing and it means so much more because you've been hearing the same things over and over again, but you've also been going home and trying to apply them. So you can't really have that understanding until you have the experience, which is kind of a catch-22. It'd be cool if you could have the understanding and then go get a bunch of experience, but that's not how it works. And I mean, for me, that's why someone like, let's take people we've had on the show. Like, we know Aaron Vale and Buck Brannaman have a like good relationship, and Aaron has ridden with Buck a lot, and those guys have what I would consider very different end goals with their horses, right? You know, Aaron's trying to qualify for the Olympics and Buck's trying to make a vaquero bridle horse to the best of his ability, right? And so, but because those guys have both spent so much time trying to get along with horses and kind of like the basic principle of like, I'm trying to get this horse to get with me and go do whatever I'm trying to do. You know, I've never seen them together, but just the way they talk about each other, you can tell that they've had kind of those conversations where it's like, oh yeah. And, you know, Aaron didn't learn everything about jumping horses from Buck, but he learned a lot from Buck because Aaron was already turning his, like, you know, I don't remember what he said, but he's been riding horses since he was old enough to ride horses, and he's a maniac at it. He just, like, talk about a hard worker. That guy is a machine. He's always riding horses. So, yeah, of course he can talk to someone like Buck and get a lot out of it. But he has so much experience that when Buck says something, he'll, like, understand it. But if you, like you said, just went down to the county horse sale and got you a colt, and then you hear Buck say stuff, or you hear Joe Walter say stuff, or you hear anybody say stuff, doesn't matter who they are, you're not going to understand it until you spend quite a bit of time trying to apply it. And if you just spend a week trying to apply what this guy says and then spend a week trying to apply what this guy says, you'll just run yourself in circles and not get anything out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, I think it's an interesting subject. And sometimes, you know, I'll listen to us talk and it's like, man, who are we to say all this? But you know what? I think it's, I don't know. I've never heard anyone else talk about it. And the way I see it is there shouldn't be like some kind of tariff on information. Like, you should be able to talk about things like you're talking about, you know, and that is something that I see. And you see the confusion register on people's faces. And I think you know what I'm talking about. Like you and I, we get around enough different horse people, even if it's, you know, tailgate conversations about what this guy's teaching and that guy teaching. And you'll see it register on people's faces. Again, not that we're like so experienced or anything, but it is something I think we've both seen is there are folks who are a little less experienced, and you'll see confusion register on their face when they hear something someone is teaching and it seems like a totally new idea. And they're like, whoa, how am I going to fit that into my program? Like, that just rocked my world. And it like really confuses them. They're like, okay, I guess I should work on it that way now. And then it happens a couple months later, they hear something else and they're like, oh man, yeah, maybe what I'm doing is wrong. I should do that. but they don't realize it's not really different. It's not different than what they have already been learning. It's not a different thing. It's just it's a slightly different way of thinking about it. Like, they don't need to go home and overhaul their life and like throw away all their pink shirts and buy blue shirts. It's like, it's very subtle. It's two different people talking about a very similar thing. And it's an opportunity to gain a wider perspective of the same subject, rather than go throw out everything that you think you know to take on something completely new. And I just think that's something that I've found interesting. And I don't know what you do about that. You can't change the world necessarily. I'm not saying for anyone that feels that way, like, I don't know, not being judgmental at all. But I've seen that. And I've seen that because I've felt that in myself. I've been pretty loyal to a particular way of thinking because it helped me get going. And I'm still loyal to the goal of what I want to get done with a horse. I don't think that's something anyone ever told me to do. It was what got me into horses. You know, we've talked about this. First time I ever saw Buck's documentary, seeing him ride that, I think it was ride an arc in that field. I was like, I want that. Like, I want to ride a horse like that. And that's my goal. That's what drives me. You know, when I'm driving home late at night from being at some clinic, or when I have, lately it's been every day when I ride my own horse first, when I'm thinking about it, as I'm saddling up, thinking about the goal someday, that's what's in my mind, is that collected bridle horse, just like dancing with him. And it's that image of Buck. And it's, I've realized more and more that's not something I was taught. No one taught me like, hey, Ben, this is the correct way to ride a horse. This is what you ought to do. No, that's my desire. That's my desire for what I want to do with horses. And like, for some people, their desire with horses is to like really win some ribbons. I think that's awesome. I'm totally behind that. It's not my desire. Like, I want to show my little horse. I think it'll push me. It'll be fun. And I do want to win. I want to be excellent at it. But it's not because I'm trying to start a show career. It's not my goal. But if that was someone else's goal, I totally support that. But with horses, for instance, one of my goals is that it's to have my horse a classical bridle horse and have it feel effortless like that. And so, like, that's my personal goal. That's something that I'm drawn to. And the more I lose resistance in my life and try to join camps all the time, I think the faster I'll get there. And I think that's I don't know, that's just an observation that I have watching people. You see some who seem to understand that. We've talked to them. It's been a lot of our guests on the podcast who kind of understand that like, it's not just cliche that you can learn something from everybody. They're really putting that into practice. They understand that. They have a goal. They have a personal goal in life. Like someone like Aaron Vale. Your example was great. He has a personal goal in life. Therefore, when he comes across other people who are good at what they do, he can learn things from them because he already knows where he's going. And maybe he's even willing to shape that goal, right? Maybe he's willing to have that goal be redirected slightly, but he's in control of that. And, but when you don't really have a goal, I mean, any old thing can put you off course pretty quick. And
yeah. You lose your identity.
I have. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't have a goal, if you don't have a heading, you can lose your identity so quickly. Because here's the thing, and I don't know, I don't think it should irritate anybody, but it might.
Go for it.
Horsemanship is a means to an end. Okay? Horsemanship is a goal to accomplish what you would like to accomplish with your horse. That doesn't mean you have to show. That doesn't mean you have to cowboy for a living. That doesn't mean that you have to do anything specifically. But you do need to have a goal, because horsemanship is a tool. It is a means to an end. It is not the deal. like horsemanship for horsemanship's sake, it can have a lot of positive impacts on your life. It can help you grow as a person, but it's a tool to help you get along with your horse. And if you don't have that goal of, oh, I want to use horsemanship because I want to do this reining pattern, or I want to use horsemanship because I want to have a horse straight up in the bridle that can do all these things. Like, if you don't have that goal, you're going to just spin your wheels. And I mean, I see it, and I know you probably see it. And it's not that I'm not condemning those people, but I'm just saying, if you're spinning your wheels, that might be the reason. Like, if you feel like you're just going in circles, well, do you know where you're trying to get to? Because not everyone can answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, like, for instance, the Joe Walter Clinic gathering deal there in North Carolina. That was his goal, right? He wanted people who had a goal. He called it a professionals clinic or whatever, but it sounded like what he really wanted was people who had a goal for what they wanted to do with their horse. And I mean, hey, some people can feel excluded from that, or you can feel like that's like, oh, they're having a professionals gathering. Well, no, it's just people with a goal. And if you don't have a goal, that's not anything against you, but you should have a goal. You should get a goal, because I've been there. In fact, I'm there in some places in my life where I don't have a goal, but I'm trying to define what that goal is. And then there's other areas in my life where I do have a goal, and I'm very thankful for that, because if I didn't have a goal, I'd be adrift. And that's really important to have a goal, because like you said, you'll just be spinning your wheels, and you won't have much of a reference point. So I think that's something you see with people that do have goals. They don't have so much pride that they can't learn from other people along the way. You know, they can see someone do something great, they can apply that to their life. And if all you are is about doing like horsemanship for horsemanship's sake, I think it's hard to see that. And yeah, I think that was a good way to put it. But
yeah. And again, I don't think that will offend anyone, but it is, you can see it in a lot of things, right? Because let me try to think of something. Okay, here's a good example. Skiing. For me, skiing is like purely recreational. I mean, when I go and ski, I try to be self-conscious and like get better, right? But I know a lot of people who like, I have no desire to get better at skiing. And I'm totally fine with that. But it's because they don't like have a goal of, well, I'm going to try to do this, or I'm going to take this lesson, or do whatever. And the thing in the horsemanship world is like, everybody likes to come together and be like, oh, you know, we're all just trying to get better. We're trying to grow. And it feels really good to say all that. Right. And then you see folks and they're not really getting better. And because like you said, they're kind of picking and choosing, and they'll do this guy and have a flavor of the month or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, what is your goal? Because you're spinning your wheels right now. Because if you had a goal, and we just talked about how you need an experience for the reference point too, but if you have a goal, you can hear someone say something and you're like, okay, he just said that. How can that get me closer to where I want to be with my horse? Right? Where in the beginning, if you've never done anything, you don't have the experience, you don't even know where you want to go. So he's just like, well, he just said to do that, so I'm going to do that now. And I don't understand why I need to do that. I don't understand how that'll help me get me where I want to go. I'm just going to do it. And it's like, okay, well, it's not going to work out. So that's why in the beginning, maybe you should just like, all right, I'm going to pick this guy. I'm going to do his program. I'm going to do what he says. I'm going to try to develop these skills that he says I need to have. And then after I've worked on developing those skills for a while and I'm kind of proficient, then you can kind of think of like, man, it would be nice to, it'd be nice to do dressage, or it'd be nice to like learn how to be a reiner, or it'd be nice to learn how to rope and like learn how to make rope horses or whatever it is, or, have the goals that we have. But if you don't have that, and I sound like now I'm spinning my wheels. If you don't have that, you're just going to keep spinning your wheels and you're not going to get anywhere. So that's the last I'll say on it.
Yeah. No, that's well said. Yeah, I don't know. While you were talking, I thought of something, but I think you kind of summed it up. But the one thing I was going to say is that, because you mentioned hopefully nobody gets offended. I mean, I don't see how someone could get offended. Somebody who has goals, wants to go somewhere. How could you get offended at that, right? We're just two guys talking about our goals, talking about what we see, talking about just the different paths that you can take. But that thing about having a goal, boy, that's so important, because that's what can define your decisions, right? That's how you could make the decision to not do what someone is teaching you. You go hang out with somebody new and they do something and you could respect it. You could see what they're doing and say, yeah, I see what you're doing. I can see how that works. I can see why that fits a horse. However, I have this goal with the horse, and that's going to negatively impact my goal. I may even take a little part of your mindset about that exercise, but I'm not going to do that exercise, And now you can feel good about that. You can make a self-aware judgment. I think I did that this weekend with a thing or two, where I recognized what my goal is and how that might jinx something. So, I'm not going to take on that actual thing, but I do understand why you're doing that, and I respect it. And I do see how that works for you. And then there's other things where you're shown something new and you have a choice. If you're self-aware, you thought about it, you realized it could help you, and then now you have a choice. Am I so proud that because that guy is like it from a different camp, I'm just not going to take it on? Or am I going to be humble and give it a try? Because I've already studied on it a little bit, and I realized that it's not going to take away from anything I'm doing, And so it's like, first, if you have a goal, first you can study on new information and you can go, does that help me further my goal, or does that take away from my goal? Does that fit what I'm going to do? But then when you're talking about, things like horsemanship or anything else where you've got different camps involved, it's like the second decision is like, okay, am I going to be proud and reject that information because it doesn't fit with my camp? Or am I going to accept that because it could fit my situation? And, people can say what they want, but I'm trying to get better. I'm not trying to look cool or act, I'm trying to get better and not just be a good member of the blah, blah, blah camp. I think that's really important. I didn't really think about that till listening to you talk just now, but just how important the goal is to that decision-making process of, does it fit what I'm doing or not? Okay, cool. Now let's throw pride out the window and make a educated decision, right? And so that's the least woo-woo thing in the world. That's a very educated decision. It's, does that fit my goal or not? If it does, I think I'm going to try it. If it doesn't, then I can exclude it. But I can take just pride or tribalism out of it. It's like that ties us directly back to the windmill thing that we started out with. It's like, okay, I don't think either one of us have a real educated opinion. We'll have a real educated view on like the pros and cons of windmills. So we can't like make a hard and fast line. Now, if we were like real tribal guys, like I'm voting this way and I'm, then we might jump on a bandwagon. But I don't think either one of us are quite that way. So we're both like sitting here like, yeah, I don't really know. Like maybe they have it seems like they must, but I don't know. Maybe they're good. Maybe they're not. They don't look good. And Like
we don't
can't
have
make
enough
a,
windmill
we can't make a
experience.
judgment. Yeah, we don't have windmill experience. We can't make a judgment. And there's people out there that would make a judgment on windmills that have zero windmill experience. And so,
Yeah.
all to say, humility. That's something I'm trying to learn. And I feel like hanging out with Joe, he leads with humility. He treated us with humility, and I really respected that. And when someone's humble like that, you can learn from them, even if that's what you pick up. Right? There might even be something they teach you exercise wise, and you're like, "Hey, that looks great." Just what I'm trying to do with my horse, that'll actually kind of confuse blah blah blah. But man, I'd like to be humble like you are, you know, at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about a guy like when you go to help someone, just absolutely giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? It's kind of what he does with the horses too. He sees you do something and he doesn't say, no, don't do that. You should do this. He's like, well, why are you doing that? Like, what is the goal, you know? And then obviously you're there, trying to get help from him. So then he might say, oh, okay, that makes sense. If that's your goal, that's what you should do. Or, if I were trying to get to that goal, maybe I'd come at it from this angle. And a lot of times he doesn't even like tell you to do things different. It's just like it's that old quote, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, right? So just coming at it with a lot of times maybe it's a little more understanding or a little more compassion than what you might be presenting, because you're so oriented on trying to get this done correctly that you haven't thought about, well, how do I really need to apply this to do it without doing a whole bunch? So yeah, it's to do that, you do have to be humble. You have to give people the benefit of the doubt. And dude, I'm sure there's times, I think every clinician like goes through this. You could be like, well, why are you doing that? And in the back of their mind, they're like, no, seriously, like, why the hell are you doing that? Why would you do that? but it doesn't come out that way with him. So it's, yeah, humility's so important because it'll enable you to learn a lot faster.
Yeah. And yeah, so, and I'd be curious what you think about this too, kind of hear what you have to say. But in conclusion, after spending those 2 days with him, my goals are the same. And all the things that I was working at are pretty much the same. I haven't thrown out, let's call it doctrine. I like that word. I haven't thrown out doctrine or taken on new doctrine. I'm still got the same goals, still trying to achieve the same thing. The thing that changed for me, thing that I learned, is I am trying to apply my doctrine in a different way. Trying to get the same thing done. And I'm just trying to get it done differently. And I feel like that's super valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with what you just said. I mean, I rode this morning. I was just messing with some horses that like I didn't bring to the clinic. And yeah, just trying to approach them with that kind of mindset of, how do I set this up to give them the benefit of the doubt? And how do I set it up where I do as little as possible to get it done? Right? Because it seems like doing more is tied hand in hand with not giving the horses the benefit of the doubt. And that to me, when you're talking about the application, that's kind of the application mindset I got out of it. But no, I totally agree. Like I still have all the same goals and want to be able to do all the same things with my horse. But I'm definitely I don't think I've ever been so mindful about how I'm going to get there before.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which, yeah, that to me is kind of like the two big qualities that Joe kept expressing, was that humility and the mindfulness.
Yeah.
And yeah, shoot, forget horses. If you had those two traits, you could pursue anything and probably get a lot done, right?
Yeah. Now I would like to say, I know we have all kinds of people that listen to this thing. And, if someone's listening and you're sitting there thinking like, I'm really struggling. Like, I've been trying this for a while. Maybe I really just need to keep exploring and trying new things and go to different people. No, probably not. Mm-hmm. Like you need to figure out what your goal is, and you need to figure out who is a reliable source for you. Someone you can trust, someone that cares about your progress. And then you need to learn some basics. Like you're not losing momentum and not gaining headway because you don't haven't been to the right clinics, or no, you need to work harder. Probably you just need to work harder and buckle down. And if that means finding the right people to be around, that's work too. Work at that. But that's really important. You need some consistency. We're not saying just go try a little bit of everything, but but that to me, that's the goal. The goal is figure out who really cares about your progress. And I've been really lucky to have some people like that around me, like people like Bill Barnes or Buck, and people who, they really care about your progress, and they really, they're good people to be around. They really care about you, and they really are honest with you, and they give you good advice, and to where you can have a strong base, where you can gain some confidence in yourself and get some experience, get some miles on some horses, get to where, you can kind of trust yourself. And then that'll start to raise questions in you, and they're different kind of questions. It's not like you're not like wondering how to not get bucked off. It's like you have different kind of questions. You have questions that come from your own search rather than just from the void of information that you don't have. Like, yeah, if you don't know anything, you're going to have a hell of a lot of questions. But once you start to have some confidence in yourself and have some understanding about things, that generates different kinds of questions. It's like questions that have to do with just enriching the journey that you're on, making it better. But if you don't really have a journey yet, you need to find good people to be around, and just learn basics, and just buckle in and work hard, and realize it's not a matter of like going to tons of different people, or like scrolling Instagram until you see the right quote. Like that, it's not really going to do it. Or even reading the books, right? I don't know if people are reading a lot of books anymore, but I remember when I first got into this, it was all the books. People would be like, you'd meet someone new and they'd be like, oh, have you read blah, 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 and they'd run down the list. And I always felt stupid because I'd be like, no, I haven't read those books. And I mean, now I've read a few of them, but I don't know. I don't think those books would have done jack. They wouldn't have helped me at all, because it would have been a bunch of confusion. And even now, like I don't know how you feel about this, but I even now feel like I just need to spend more time like gaining experience in riding. Like I still don't feel ready to like crack out some of these books you hear people talk about. Like I've read, Think Harmony with Horses, which to me was almost a textbook, with a lot of, a lot of good information, and just helps you think about things in a different way. But it was kind of textbooky. I think textbooks are great, but some of these books about theory and like relativity of, horsemanship, it's like I don't even feel like I'm ready for that kind of stuff, because I just want to keep working at it. Like I kind of know where I'm trying to go, and I want to keep working hard and building my base. And so when folks talk about these books, they're like, oh yeah, I'm trying to do this and I'm struggling. Like, oh, well, have you read this book? It's like, I don't know. I don't know if you just need to read more books either. In my
Yeah.
experience, hard work is the best teacher. Hard work and mistakes and wet saddle pads and good people around you that are helping you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like you have to do all that work for the books or the videos or even the clinics to have value, right? You can't, you got to start with some information, obviously, but you just have to turn your hand at it and just keep going. And in some ways it sucks. Like it's a crappy way to learn in a lot of ways. But you have to do it. But it's also kind of exciting that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it gives you the ability to be in charge of your own destiny in a way and discover things. You're not, back in 5th grade memorizing definitions out of a textbook or whatever and learning that way. You're actually there doing it and kind of figuring out, well, I do this, then this happens, and I do this, then this happens, and then I can see there that they're like this, and that kind of has meant this in the past. Let's see if it means that this time, and you just develop feel. Really, it's just all those instances and all that experience starting to get put together, and you develop a feel and a way of being around the whole situation. Yeah. You don't need that stuff till later. Unless you buy Cowboy Week on nickdowers.com and use promo code on the move for 10% off. That will help you instantly, and I'd suggest anyone go do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would definitely help you. It might help us a little bit too someday. Well, that's something else Joe said this weekend. He made a comment about, how come you don't remember like a lot of the stuff you learned in school? It's because there was no consequence. Like you just learned a bunch of information, but there was no consequence. You didn't fail. You just learned stuff and you were tested on it. But if you failed the test, it wasn't like, something happened to you if you failed. You just had to redo it. There was no real detrimental consequence. And he was saying how, horses learn the same way and we learn the same way. You have to have some failure. And that to me that's pretty applicable to that book thing. Like if you're just reading books, that's great. Gaining a bunch of information in your head, but you're not really going to learn it. You're probably not going to retain it because like reading a book, there's no like adverse effect as you read a book. You don't fail while you're reading a book. You fail while you apply what you've learned. And so if you're just focusing on taking in information, like we talked about that a long time ago. And I remember you saying, I forget who we were talking with, but you were saying how, there's a lot of horse academics. There's not very many horse practitioners. And, the horse practitioner can really go somewhere with a little bit of academia. But a horse academic with very little practitioner in them, they're not going to go very far because they can't fail and they can't learn from it. They just read a bunch of information and it just comes and it goes. And frankly, I think, reading a bunch of books, it's not much different than going to a bunch of clinics, right? You can go to a bunch of clinics all you want, gain all the information you want. But unless you go to that clinic and you're willing to really fail and learn from it and then take that information home and work at it and fail, and learn from it, you're not really gaining. You're just doing academia. So, yeah, good stuff, man.
That struck me when he was saying all that. He was talking about the horses. He said, you can't ever let them succeed if they don't ever fail. Right? To let them succeed, you have to let them fail. It's the same with people, right? It's if there's no failure involved, is it really a success? You can't have one without the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going outside of your comfort zone. That's how I felt like when I worked with that little, the little Morgan horse. I didn't really want to get him out. I was like, I'm enjoying riding my horse. And then I realized that was me not wanting to be uncomfortable. Not only did I not want to go put my horse away and get a different horse out, but I didn't want to bring up any trouble. I was like, I've learned some stuff from Joe so far. And I think I could take that home and apply it. And things will probably already go a little bit better now that I'm thinking about it kind of like this. And I've already learned a lot of stuff in the past. And I think it'll all be fine. I'll just take that horse home and do it at home. And then, I'm sitting there, and then that came in my head. It flashed in my head, and I thought, you know what? That's the path of least resistance, is sit here and just listen and think that I'm learning something and I'm giving my horse a good break, and, I'll just take this information home and, it'll all be okay. Bull crap. No, what I needed to do, and it's what I did do, is put my horse away that I was riding and then go get the horse that had trouble and get him out and expose my sin, so to speak, be like, hey, this is what I've got going on. What would you do differently? And then I learned something, because otherwise I would have sat there and listened and I wouldn't have learned anything. And I would have just pat myself on the back for like whatever I made up in my head. So I wouldn't have to work a little harder and go get a horse out that I'm not super proud of and bring him in front of everybody and just learn something new. And that was a real world experience for me this weekend. Was a clear decision. I could sit there or I could act. And if I acted, I would learn, and it would be a little more humiliating. Or I could not act and I could not learn and I could look cool. And I'm glad I chose the latter, but it's easy to do that. It's easy to sacrifice learning for looking cool, but that'll only get you so far, right? It's like you can look cool all you want, but it's like you won't be growing. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it was fun to watch you work with that horse. And it was the same reason I was glad we got to do some work on the cutting flag too. Oh my gosh, you talk about humbling.
Oh man, did you hear, like when I did it that first day, I felt like I really sucked the most that first day. And then Joe came over to me and he, that little smile, and he just laughed. And I think he like put his hand on my saddle or something. He goes, "Not quite what you're expecting, was it?" And it's like, and I was like, no, I kind of was at this point, but like, I didn't think I was going to do that good, but I could tell he was kind of like, no, what you're expecting, huh? Like you thought you were going to come in here like Mr. Cowboy and work this flag, and you look like an idiot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I was thinking on the drive home, because the second day we worked the flag, and it's just kind of starting to get, I don't know, trying to tighten it up a little bit. And Joe just stops the flag and he looks at me and he's like, "You're just going to have to learn to control your body a whole lot better." It's like, oh my gosh. Talk about somebody like when you ride horses for a living and then a clinician look you dead in the eye and tell you that, you're like, crap. Yeah. Which, I mean, he's not, like, how important is all of that, how, like you said, you got to develop the skills and get the experience. So I'm determined to work on that and build my awareness and build my feel. Like it really motivated me. But talk about something that makes you feel like 2 inches tall in the moment. It's just like, man. Yeah. And then he was explaining it, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. And he's like, people always say it makes sense, and then I watch them ride around, and I'm like, it must not make sense because they're not doing it.
Yeah.
And I told him, I was like, I said it makes sense. I didn't say I could do it, but it makes sense.
Yeah. Man,
it's just
that's so true though, because you're faced with those moments where, like, when someone who's teaching you says something like that, you can take offense to it, and whatever.
Yeah.
But if it's true, like, don't you want to learn from that? But it's also very humbling when it's true. Like, if it was wrong, you know, it wouldn't be a big deal. You'd be like, it would just blow right over, like water off a duck's back, and you wouldn't have to learn from it. But when someone says something like that and it's true, it's humbling. Like, how valuable is that? Because now you don't have to do that anymore. You know, whatever that thing is, you can quit doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And stuff like that. If you're willing to take it, and it's not fun to sit there and take it, but if you're willing to take it, man, holy crap, is it worth the price of admission? Because there's just so much that can come out the other side of that. So much good can come from that if you're willing to embrace it. But especially, you know, like you said, especially if you're riding with a guy from like maybe a little different camp or whatever, how easy would it be to take something like that and be like, I knew this guy didn't know what the hell he's talking about or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Which I didn't take it like that. Like I feel like everyone can always develop more feel and more timing and more coordination. And so it's just something that has really, really motivated me, you know? Like I said, I'm like reinvigorated. And that happens anytime I go to a clinic, because I try to, like you said, put yourself out there to where you can fail.
Yeah. I think that's happened to me a few times at Buck's clinics where he said things to me, and man, it's so embarrassing. Like, I want to get under a rock and hide forever, but he's right. And man, when he's said things in clinics to me like that is kind of embarrassing, but really, really true. I've never wanted to change more in my life. I've never wanted to, you know, whether it's something I need to go home and work at, or like in the moment, I just need to do the opposite of whatever I was doing. It's like that time he told me that I think something like I had so much electricity in my butt that if they shoved a lightning rod up my ass, it could power Atlanta. And I was just like, it was so embarrassing because I thought I kind of had some stuff going on. It was so embarrassing that it made me want to just like quit doing whatever it was I was doing on my horse and just get so peaceful, just change. And I'm sure it didn't look like it right then, but that's one of those valuable moments in my horsemanship journey. It's when he said that to me. Because if he had said, "Oh, you're a little bit busy," you know, like I would have been like, "Oh, yeah, I'm a little busy, but Buck, I don't think you realize what I'm trying to work on over here," you know. But when he said that, it was like, "Oh crap, is it that bad? I've got to change. I've got to do something different." And yeah, no, that I really enjoyed it, man. That was a lot of fun. And like you said, I don't think we've offended anybody, but I think these are good things to talk about. And
yeah, because you can't just sit there and get yourself in a little rut on your own little island. You got to get out into the world. You got to talk to people and exchange these ideas and think about stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you have to do everything that any Tom, Dick, or Harry tells you to do, but it does mean you have to think about stuff and be able to justify your ideas or what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to take some ownership over your ideas, and I think that's how you combat the tribalism too. You have some humility, is you take ownership over your ideas. If you think something, you want to learn something from somebody, or you think it's a good idea, or you think it's a bad idea, you know, stand up for that, test it out, do some homework on it, and don't be afraid to talk about it. It's all right, and I think it's easy for people to, you know, maybe you feel like you're a part of a camp, or you've always wanted to be a part of a group. So now you purposely act even more cliquey, so you're accepted. You don't have to do that, you know? I mean, look how On the Move got started. There's only 2 of us in this clique. And, but seriously, I think that's something, that's probably why we get along so well is, you know, we just want to get better. And you find that, like most people, when you talk to most people, like outside of their group, they want to get better. They're not judging anybody, but it's easy when you get together with a bunch of people to want to be a part of a certain group. That's fine. That's a natural thing. People want to belong. Your horse feels the same way. He wants to please you. But man, if you really want to get better, you have to do less judging. And you see that with, especially the folks we've had on this podcast that are really progressing. Like there's nothing about them that talks about other people or judges other people. If anything, they say positive things about other people. I can't think of like particular examples right now, but I know we've had people on here and they've made positive comments about people that I didn't even think they liked, and no negative comments. And that, they say, if you want to get better, find people that are good at what they do and emulate them. And to me, that's like one of the ways to emulate people and that's one of the things I notice about those people, whether it's Joe or Buck or Ricky or Nick or like all these different people we've had on here. All they do is they say a lot of positive things about other people, and they try to learn from any situation they can. And the only people I've ever heard just sit around and talk bad about other people, they're not progressing that much. So
Amen.
Anyway,
I think that's a good place to wrap her up, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. Go get some more things done today. Is it hot up there at your place? Man, I got home this morning, like I said, we got home late last night, early this morning, and it's so muggy down here.
No. I've been wearing this vest all day.
I was wondering about that.
Because
I'm sitting here, I've got my shirt like unbuttoned and stuff, and it's kind of warm in here. I'm like, how are you wearing a vest? I know your basement gets cold, but
yeah. But no, it's kind of been like an overcast, rainy day. It was like nice this morning and then rained about lunchtime. It was actually perfect that I came in here when it started raining. But no, it's all beautiful weather up here in God's country.
Good deal. All righty. Well, yeah, we can wrap it up. And then, folks, we're trying to get a little bit better about not boring you with ads. In fact, actually, here's a cool little thing. Joe and I are busy, so we don't really have time to listen to our own podcast, but we know that occasionally this podcast carries some ads. So if you guys, I don't know, if you're listening to the podcast and there's any like interesting ads that only the listeners hear, tell us about it. We love your DMs and stuff on Instagram, but that would be like a good conversation piece for you, is like, tell us about the ads that you're listening to on this podcast. But besides that, if you guys want to help us out, speaking of Instagram, you can go over there and you can follow us. And we're now on TikTok as well. Joe's kind of spearheading that. So you can follow us on TikTok. You can follow us on Facebook. And then also we have, Joe's wearing one right now, but we have these hats. And we've got some mugs, stickers, got a few other things like that. So if you're interested, hit us up and we'll hook you up with some merchandise. But we really appreciate all the support. Anything you guys can do to help us helps us out a lot, because we can't say too much about it, but like there's some really cool guests that I think you guys would love to hear from. But in order for Joe and I to interview them, there's travel costs involved and time away from our respective businesses and stuff like that. So if you guys, whatever support you guys give us, it does go directly to the podcast, and we'll keep getting interesting, cool, famous, on the move sort of individuals on here to talk about stuff.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. See you next week.